Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network. Every 2 weeks we look at 2 films from the A24 filmography, and in between we try and bring you interviews with the talent involved. In this episode we turn our attention to The Kill Team and Waves. So welcome back, Dallas.
It's good to be back. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. We're recording this episode a little bit early due to sort of the way life is at the moment. But so there'll be no A24 hour news, but there's currently none to report. So no doubt within the next 2 weeks there'll be breaking news of Green Knight release dates and so on and so on. But one thing we should give a shout out to is that there may not be a release date for the Green Knight, but a board game has come out and you've already kind of pre-ordered it, Dallas.
Yes, I have. Yes, I know you. I mean, there was the talk on the previous episode. I think you'd bought your Midsummer Japanese poster. Then there was the fancy DVD Blu-ray set that came out, and I was like, well, I don't really have the space for another poster. I'm like, I don't need the DVD. I've already got a copy. And then I was like, this sort of emailed, and I'm like, I'm currently going through a phase. My lockdown thing at the moment is buying old vintage board games and new board games based on movies. So I've got like Escape from New York, Dune, Alien, Back to the Future, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, Dawn of the Dead. So I mean, as soon as that, and I just recently started experimenting with Dungeons and Dragons. So it was basically Dungeons and Dragons meets A24 in a board game. I'm like, well, of course I'm going to buy it. And yes, I did within, like, I think even before it got onto Twitter, I think I got the email. And by the time it had got on Twitter, I'd already ordered it. And yes, it should arrive mid-August. So I'm thinking that, I mean, we could do an unboxing video and potentially live stream us playing it, although we'd have to play it over Zoom due to social distancing, of course, but you never know if people want to hear a couple of us attempt to. I mean, I guess the potential is it could be full of spoilers. I mean, I've already read The Legend of the Green Knight. I read up on that, but I think you've stayed pretty clear of it, so you might not want to take part in fear of spoilers, perhaps.
I know, who would have thought like a board game would be kind of spoilerific. I mean, I remember getting the email as well, and I was like, I just sort of looked down at my phone. It was like Green Knight. I think it was like D&D or something like that. And I was like, and I was just sort of glanced. I was like, well, the Green Knight is going to VOD. Oh well, I guess I'll maybe get to see it sort of soon. And then I sort of like looked at it properly, and I was like, oh, it's a board game. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to sort of to see it. It looks like a really impressive kind of kit. So yeah, the merch continues to become more innovative than sort of expensive candles, which it's now feels like, yeah, I'm slightly being ripped off here, but I feel like I'm getting a premium product and not just sort of paying $50 for candles and a towel.
Yeah, no, the pricing was actually surprisingly reasonable. I mean, obviously, you've got the duty, the shipping, and the taxes on top of that to the UK, so it is a bit more. But I wasn't put off too much by the price, certainly compared to some of the other items on there. But I do know someone that I want to speak to for the 24 project. I think we need to get the guy who does or girl who does the videos for the commercials, because this video, along with the bear in a cage one, have been really sort of cool, sort of in keeping with like the 80s sort of style of retro style, these sort of things. So I think we need to find out who's making these promotional videos for A24 and get them on for a chat.
This is our like third last episode of like double pairing, so maybe we sort of move on from the movies to the advert series. So yeah, we break down 2 adverts at a time. So let's get our thoughts on the Midsummer. We'll get an interview with the little boy and girl, find out how they got cast in it. I can visualize the podcast right now.
Oh yeah, we've got to milk this dry for every single penny that we've got just to keep it going until they finally start releasing new films again.
Absolutely. So we're going to go back just a couple months now to sort of this pairing today. So the first one up is The Kill Team. So US Specialist Andrew Briggman becomes conflicted with his morals when his platoon under his superior, Sergeant Deeks, participate in murdering civilians in Afghanistan. And when he contemplates reporting to the authorities, he realises how much danger he is in as his platoon becomes increasingly violent and Deeks begins to suspect his loyalties. So Dallas, when did you first see The Kill Team?
I first saw it a couple of weeks ago on Apple iTunes US, because I'm not sure if I don't think this one ever got really a UK release. It's not really surprising given the subject matter. There has been some crossover in sort of things like with the US military sort of stuff recently, with like Hurt Locker and Jarhead and stuff like that. But this was a brand new one to me, so I hadn't watched the trailer or anything. And I have to say, initially I was a little bit cold on it, but it started to come together sort of towards in the sort of second half of the movie. For me, it was actually started to remind me of one of my favorite war films, Casualties of War, the Brian De Palma and Michael J. Fox. It had the sort of storylines are really quite similar in that both sort of platoons end up doing some really horrible things, but you've got this one member of the team who's very resistant to it and is threatening to blow the whistle. And it's about, weighing up the potential danger to himself versus the danger that other people are put in by the team, and then also the sort of moral ethical thing of, are you betraying your country and stuff by doing it? Who is? I guess it's a question of loyalty and stuff like that. And I thought that definitely in the second half of this film they really managed to sort of get into that a lot more, and a lot of that was down to the performances, especially sort of Sarsgaard as the captain, because he sort of changes with the wind. I think in terms of his performance, I thought it was very good. What about yourself?
Yeah, I caught this one at the start of the year. It did sort of have a UK release, but very much just sort of video on demand, so you can sort of rent it for a couple quid from places like Amazon and so on. I don't think it ever got any sort of cinema release here, so yeah, kind of very much a straight to DVD release here. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was one of those sorts of last few A24 films that I was sort of just like kind of making my way through, and I was kind of always kind of curious about this one because it sort of was always sort of about that $6 price mark, and I was like, I don't think it's going to be worth that much. And then when it kind of became like a 99 cents rent, I was like, yep, I'm gonna dive into this one. I thought it was an interesting kind of film. It's nothing with kind of A24 films that you sort of are looking for that unique perspective that they bring to something, whether that's kind of childhood, sort of, the occult, you name it. This one felt like I'd kind of seen something like this before. It looks at sort of that, the stresses, the aggression of sort of soldiers that go to war. And I think it reminded me of sort of Jarhead, which I was a bit sort of, that was a film I was a bit cold on first. Sort of, I was like, well, come on, when's this film going to get going, But I find it interesting when you get films like Jarhead and this that look at the boredom, the social pressure, the dynamics of being sent off to war and sort of seeing the people around you killed off. I think when you look at America basically, and people are being scooped up out of high school, there's people that are driven by patriotism to go off and fight people to take out frustrations. It's a real mixed bag of kind of people that are thrown in together, and you sort of see that with this kind of military troop. And I found that interesting to sort of see those dynamics and sort of how they operated in sort of Afghanistan. My brother was previously sort of in the army, so he was sort of at the tail end of being out in Afghanistan. So yeah, it was quite interesting to sort of see how that kind of was set up. But I think the film certainly got better as it went on, and as the sort of tension really built with this kind of troop.
Yeah, no, I think like the first half, which is sort of like setting up the kill team, where it's a bit of the sort of going through the motions of that sort of almost sort of Full Metal Jacket, sort of the commanding officer sort of playing all the guys off each other in order to sort of develop, in the sort of Wolf, the lead actor, is sort of shown to be initially like he's not really up for it, but then he sort of manages to worm his way into the position of sort of leading one of the teams, and that sort of puts everyone his nose up and against him and stuff like that. And then it's when he starts to uncover the truth of what's going on. They're actually sort of planting evidence of weapons and stuff like that in order to justify taking out people. And it's sometimes, and it's not clear whether or not these people are guilty or not. They might have been guilty of something, whether they're guilty of the thing that they've been accused of. It's not. And yeah, they sort of tread into very murky waters, and it does it effectively in the second half, where I think it's very good at sort of amping up the tension of the personal fear that he feels, not from the enemy but from the enemy within and stuff. And about, they go out for target practice one day, and one of them guys is like telling him to go and bring in the targets, and he thinks he's going to get shot in the back and stuff like that. And it really reminded me of Casualty Wars at that point, because there's a great scene where they get back to, essentially Casualties of War, everyone apart from Michael J. Fox is guilty of kidnapping and raping a Vietnamese woman, and then killing her at the end. And then when they get back to camp, Michael J. Fox basically, dobs them in and stuff. And then there's a sort of scene where he basically goes to the bathroom, and they try to kill him by basically putting a grenade under the toilet and stuff like that. So, it really sort of felt like that, and just in a sort of modern setting. But again, it also sort of shows that, history repeats itself, different war, but the same sort of mentality and the same sort of stuff happens. You've got people who go there because they think they're doing the right thing. This character, the main character, comes from a military family, so he's been bred in that. But you've got people who are clearly there because they like the idea that they're basically being paid by the government to go over and kill people. So it kind of shows all different sides, and I think what it does is, I'm not going to get into the final act, because this is probably one of the underseen A24 films, and I don't want to ruin it for anyone. But I think it does leave you. It's a certain film that will definitely leave you with questions, and will probably inspire conversations to be had with the audience that you go and see it with. And I think for that aspect, I think it's definitely worth a watch. Certainly, it's not going to be top tier A24. It's certainly not, but I think it's definitely worthy of discussion, I think.
I think one film that will definitely be worth kind of watching it with as well is actually the original documentary. So writer-director Dan Krause has actually got a documentary called The Kill Team. So this film is very, very close to sort of the true life story of Private Andrew Winfield. So he was a 21-year-old soldier in Afghanistan, and he attempted, with the help of his father, to alert the military to the murders his platoon was committing, but his pleas went unheeded. And the documentary sort of very much looks at sort of the wartime events, the legal proceedings that kind of followed, and sort of looking at the soldiers and footage of at the time. So it's one of those ones where it's very much drawn from real life. So I would love to maybe have an interview with someone like sort of Dan one day to kind of dive into taking that documentary and turning it into a feature. And I sadly never got the chance to sort of find the documentary to check it out. So I'd really like to see that one, because it's not just a short documentary, it is also a feature length one. And a very interesting story. And I think what makes it almost so tense, that scene you described where like he's going out into the firing range to go get the targets and so on. God, you feel stressed watching that, because you're like, oh my God, like they probably could shoot him, because like things like this have happened, they've been exposed, there's probably many other cases where something like this has happened and it's maybe been swept under, or it's been kind of covered up within platoons. So there's that tension that you get underneath for thinking like anything genuinely could kind of happen here. It's it's a bit of a wild west out there in Afghanistan.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's a fascinating watch towards the end to see how it all comes together. And I think it's certainly the documentary is something I hadn't actually realised until sort of reading up on it afterwards, that it was inspired by a real story. And I think it's probably safe to say, certainly from, we sort of saw there was a lot of coverage in the press and stuff like that when like the wars on Iraq and Afghanistan, sort of the public opinion sort of turned on those about the people who were taking photos of themselves, sort of urinating on captives with bags over their heads and stuff like that. And you hear about the atrocity over there. This is certainly not an isolated case. And it's probably not the last movie we're going to get about the war and this kind of thing, I think.
Absolutely. So have you got any kind of final thoughts on The Kill Team?
No, I think it's, like I said, I think it's basically... It's certainly one that I think is worth watching, because the central performances are very strong, and I think it will leave you with a lot of questions, probably a lot of doubt in the authenticity and the honesty of the military. But I think anything that inspires sort of conversation and stuff like that is worth a watch.
Yeah, so we dive into our second film now, Waves. So this is the third A24 feature from writer-director Trey Edward Shults, following on from Krisha and It Comes at Night. So Waves is about a controlling father attempts to ensure that his two children succeed in high school, backfires after his son experiences a career-ending sports injury. Their familiar bonds are eventually placed under severe strain by an unexpected tragedy. So before we dive into the film, let's hear from writer-director Trey Edward Shults, who we got the chance to interview last year.
I will always love you.
I read that sort of the idea for Waves has been kicking around a decade. When was the moment that you realised you could actually make this your third feature?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think really when I was making my last film, It Comes at Night, they're also very different. And I think I was craving a movie like Waves, and it was all sort of starting to come together more at that time. So I even remember when we made Night, the Frank Ocean's Endless and Blonde had come out, and driving around on weekends to waterholes and dreaming about making waves. So it was around that time.
Obviously, the film in that kind of period of time hasn't taken much iterations. I remember at one point there was a rumour that this was going to be a musical.
Yeah.
I would love to see a Trey Edward Shults musical first. At what point did that all sort of come together, that this would be the form it would take in terms of this sort of big 2-act structure?
Long time. This has sort of been embedded in the DNA for many, many years. I think around 2011, maybe 2012 was when the epiphany of the 2-act structure, brother and sister thing clicked into space, but it was never meant to be a musical. Yeah. I think someone just reported it wrong and it got spread out and everything. But yeah, it was always that structure and sort of kind of like a soundtrack-based film, in the vein of old movies I love, like Boogie Nights and Dazed and Confused and Goodfellas.
I'd read that this is an incredibly personal film for you, and that seems to be a trend with your films. I think Krisha, for example, which I absolutely love. I mean, I did think, there couldn't be a more personal film than this. Film with your family, shooting with your family. I actually recently interviewed her herself. What was that like to sort of invest yourself in this script on a personal level and to shoot it? And is it a cathartic experience to write it, film it, and then how do you feel afterwards when you see something so personal to you on screen?
It was very cathartic, writing it, making it. I think also because Krisha was extremely personal, but it was more taking from family members that had suffered with addiction that we were very close with, and recreating things. And this was probably more like a film that's purely me as a human, where I'm at as a human being right now in all these different capacities, and a lot of autobiographical things from my life. Incredibly cathartic, amazing experience, best of my life, but releasing it has been weird because it's almost I don't know, it's just very surreal. Whoa, now people are actually seeing this and it's not mine anymore. Yeah. So
obviously you reunite with Kelvin Harrison Jr, who was in It Comes at Night. Was he always the person you had in mind for that kind of role, and what was the process of developing this character and the script?
It was as soon as I hadn't met him until It Comes at Night, when he auditioned for that and got cast in that, and we hit it off like crazy, and we continually gotten closer and closer. And I remember as soon as we started working together, I was like, oh shit, what if he could be, there's a lot of roles in Waves, and there's one particular role I think he'd be amazing at. And then it sort of started there, and we started talking about things. And even before I sent him a first draft, I was texting him, asking a lot of personal stuff in his life, and it really evolved from there. He got the first draft of his script probably 8 months before we shot, and we were collaborating a lot on Tyler and his family and the nuance of that family, and a lot of it was sort of finding a commonality between both of our experiences. So as personal as everything is in this movie, we would siphon from personal stuff in Kelvin's life and come together on stuff. Really a lot of the dynamic between Tyler and his dad in the film. First, it was between myself and my dad and stepdad, but then it became a lot about the commonality with Kelvin and his dad as well, and how he pushed him with music instead of wrestling. And so it really went pretty dense into all of that, and it really led off with Kelvin. And then as other cast members came, that sort of collaboration continued with everyone.
What was that like, bringing this cast together? Because it's such a fantastic cast that you've got here. How did you bring all these people together, and developed this really interesting family dynamic between them.
It was amazing. Just a mix of like standard casting and not at times, a lot of it, it totally varied. Kelvin was attached forever. Sterling, we just sent him the script and had a phone call. Then he met Kelvin, Taylor, Alexa, like actually auditioned, and then we FaceTimed, and the kids would meet each other in LA and everything. It was amazing. Really all I care about is like finding incredible human beings that are crazy talented and that we just connect with. So I just felt like the luckiest dude in the world when we were filming, because they blow me away every day.
Obviously, I'm not going to go into any kind of spoilers, but with the film, it has this clear 2-act kind of structure and parts. And that first half is just so incredibly intense. Was there ever a worry that for how our audience is going to react when there's this sudden change? Do you feel, I know the audience, the people that will come see my films, they will trust me and go along with this. Was there ever any worries that there'll be a whiplash and people are like, oh, the film's ended, and it continues on? Was there any worries about that and stuff?
Totally. I mean, that was something we always talked about, just in the DNA of it. Like, is this going to work? I mean, the climax of the movie is halfway through, and then we completely switch perspectives and go on a totally different journey and tonal journey. We always had the big theory, like, if it would work for people, it would be who that girl is that's Emily, and if you can switch with her and be compelled by her in this new journey, kind of. And for me, it's always been very curious for people to see the movie twice too, because like I've seen it a million times, but it's like a lot of the real heart and soul of the movie are in part 2. So it's like I just hope people can really go with it, because the people that do, it seems very rewarding. It's almost like, I kind of like thinking of it like if you feel like you have a panic attack and then the movie gives you a hug for a while, and you get to the other side of that panic attack, I guess.
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the things that's been so prominent from your 3 films and your short is that you can shoot tension amongst families so well to almost a suffocating level. What's that? How do you sort of do that so well in the script? And obviously you've edited this film as well. What's your magic touch to create that?
It's a good question. I'm not quite sure. I think it's just that the movies are very personal, and I feel like I've lived them in a lot of ways, or my loved ones have lived them, and I just feel like I know it, and I love film, and I love film grammar, so it's just like putting that emotion into the filmmaking, if that makes sense, and like especially this movie in Krisha felt like sort of subjective first-person immersive experiences. For this one, first it's Tyler and then it's Emily, but everything we see and feel is through those characters. And I think if you do that honestly, then Tyler has a very intense journey. So if we capture that honestly and with a specific kind of film language, I think it leads to the experience you feel.
This is obviously, you've been on somewhat of a journey yourself. This is your 3rd film with A24. You've gone from Krisha, like family home, shooting with family and friends, to something like this kind of sprawling epic and stuff. I think I saw someone compare it to almost like A24's version of Magnolia. What's that journey been like for you over those 3 films as you've sort of evolved and everything's continued to refine and more money perhaps coming to you, big names getting involved in your project? What's that been like for you as a journey? And does it give you opportunities to make, are these the type of films you always wanted to make, or is it kind of part of the evolution?
Yeah, it's a good question, man. For me, it's been really incredible. I think because we made Krisha in such a unique way, and that was such an incredible experience, for me, it was just figuring out how do we continue that as we're evolving and things are getting bigger. Like for this movie, I went from first 2 movies, almost a single location for the entire films, to over 50 locations in like 35 days. Half of that in cars. I'd shot in a car one time for a brief scene before this. It was incredible though, because, it's like, I talked about the approach with the cast and how, so like that, some of the main collaborators, we just love each other. It feels like a family, but that approach is the same way with the crew, and I'm working with some of the same people I started out with on Krisha, so it really just feels like a big family. I feel like making this has been Waves was the best shoot in my life so far, and we all kind of feel like, how are we ever going to top it? So yeah, it's been really amazing.
One thing that caught me early in the film when I was watching the credits was you've got a colorist in there. Usually that's like banished to like the mid credits. No one ever notices it.
Yeah.
I love the visual look of this film and stuff. How was that sort of came together in that collaboration? And obviously that's someone that you've got front and center. I forgot their name. How did that sort of look for the film come to be?
Well, Damo we're very close with. He colored our last film, It Comes at Night, as well. And Drew, who shot it, has shot all of my movies. The visual look, it started with the script and just grew from there. I mean, in the script, camera movement was talked about, aspect ratios were talked about, literally using different colors and fonts for different parts of the movie. And we're shooting in Florida, one of the most beautiful places to me. So, it was pretty much embedded in there and just continued. And, we shot it as a very subjective, immersive experience, and Drew played with color a lot. It was a lot of fun, and Damo, or us working with Damo, we feel like he just brought it to the next level. It's one of my highly valued collaborations.
One of your new collaborators on this film is Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. How did they sort of come to be involved in this film, and what was that process like for scoring this film? Because it's such a beautiful score that you've got here.
Thank you so much. It was really amazing. One of the coolest emails of my life. I got an email that Trent Reznor wants to meet me, and I went out to LA and had lunch with him and Atticus, and we all just hit it off. They seemed to like really dig my last two movies and wanted to work together. And I believe I was writing Waves at the time, actually. And I was like, I got something for you soon. And I sent it to them, and they loved it. And it was really incredible. And I think at first they were really, because like the soundtrack was in the script too, so you could play music as you're listening. So I was a little bit like, what are these incredible composers going to think when they get a script with like 50 soundtrack songs and they're like, where do we fit into this? But they weren't turned off by that. They were super excited by that, and how does score differentiate the soundtrack, and where do we fit in there? And I think the thing, we did some trial and error and experimentation along the way, but I think we really what we landed on is a kind of, we feel like the score is very internal for Tyler and then Emily, and subjective to their experience. Again, like they would take sounds from the movie and fuse those and combine those with musical elements, and I think a lot of the heart and kind of spirit of the movie is in their score and melody and themes at times, because there's so much other existing music. That's what like links and everything and connects everything together. So it was really amazing.
What was the editing process like for this as well? You're the editor, not just writer, director, you get an editing role as well. Is that sort of part of that control of, this is something that's so personal to you and making sure that it's brought to life in the best way? What's it like editing your own work, and do you have a critical eye for yourself when you're doing anything? Oh my God, what was that guy thinking with that shot? How do you sort of edit yourself?
It's very fun. It gets hard at a time. For this one, this was easily the hardest thing I've ever edited, because we had enough material for a 4-hour movie, literally 2 2-hour movies. And I edited alone for almost 7 months, just on my laptop in Florida. And it was simultaneously the most exhilarating, amazing thing I'd ever done, and the hardest that, after editing for months on end, and I don't really do an assembly, I just like edit in real time as I'm going, and then getting to it's just like, it was hard. But I think it's how I start. Like Krisha was the only editor. All my shorts before that, I was the only editor. I grew up like filming my family and editing those into videos, so it's like the most intimate thing. And I feel like literally just being alone, locked in a room with only my hands on the keyboards. I feel like I know every square inch of all the footage, everything that's in the movie, and all the possibilities, and also I just get to literally experience it firsthand again. Just like when I'm first writing, it's just on a laptop and going through. So it's really amazing. I'm going through like long benders and crying like a baby and doing all and experimenting, and it's really amazing. But then after 7 months alone, you lose your mind. And then I brought in Isaac Hagee, my man, and we reined it in and got it down to a digestible like 2:15 movie. But yeah, it was great.
What's the marketing process now like for this film? Because I remember watching the trailer, like for when the trailers come out, I watched it once, don't want to see it again until the film. And then I remember going into the film going, this wasn't the film I expected at all, not in a negative way. And then I was like, I'm going to go back and visit that trailer. How did I maybe think it was going to be something different? And it's one of those ones, like, I think it's so great. I just watched it before we did this interview, just to go get myself in the head, say, how are they putting this film out there? Yeah. Is it a difficult one? Because what makes this film really so great is so much of it is hidden and secret. And now the film is going out into the world, and there'll be conversations, there'll be think pieces online, blah, blah, blah. And how does these people navigate talking about the film but not ruining what makes this film so special and unique, and that structure as well that you've worked so hard on?
Totally. I mean, it's been really hard, and that's what we struggled with the marketing and everything. And I'd say the trailer that's out there now hopefully captures sort of the spirit and soul of the overall movie, especially after you get through the end of part 2 and everything. Probably does not prepare you for a lot of things that happen. But then it's good too. We're gonna have a new trailer soon that plays more with different tonal sides of the movie as well. I don't know, man. It's been interesting. The big thing though that we always talked about is not like how do we get people intrigued and interested and feeling tonally true to the movie without spoiling what exactly it is and where all it goes. So I feel really good about that so far, that we haven't spoiled anything. And
do you feel a lot of these interviews are people going to be dancing around things going, so wink, wink, this part here?
A few times already, it's like, when the thing happens, but we can't. So it's been interesting. It will be interesting to see how it goes. Yeah.
And obviously I think this is your last part of your like 3 deal thing that you had with A24. Is that going to kind of continue on? Because you seem like really good collaborators, and I'd heard a story about how you first discovered that you wanted A24 pick up Krisha. That was your goal and stuff like that. Is that relationship going to continue? Because you seem to be making great films together, or will it just be naturally kind of moving on to something?
I mean, I hope so. I have no idea. This is the first time creatively I feel like I'm now at a blank slate. After making Krisha, I was pretty much working non-stop to make It Comes at Night, then make Waves, and it was always like the next thing, and it kind of felt like they were all just leading to Waves, if that makes sense. And that was the first time we got to sort of play with every tool and flex every muscle that we had gone through to lead to that. And I just feel like I put all my everything creatively as a human being into this movie right now. So now I'm like a blank slate. I have no idea what's next. Need to get away, after we do press and stuff. Hopefully I can take some time off if it's okay financially, and then I don't know, figure out.
Perfect. We might see the Trey Edward Shults musical after all.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, one of the best movies. I like the fact it's even in IMDb trivia, long suspected to be a musical. Who?
All of it. I believe that's all because someone heard about the local casting in Florida and then heard music was in the movie, so reported it wrong.
People were talking in the press line, I've heard this is going to be a musical and stuff like that, so it's going to be interesting to see
it. People do sing in the movie. Yeah. They sing with songs, so maybe it's as close.
There's going to be an absolutely banging Spotify playlist of this movie, I think,
I hope so, man.
Well, thank you so much. Honestly, this film has been such a treat, and I can't wait to see how people react to the film. How have people, obviously it's kind of pressed so far, they've probably most seen it. What are you hoping people are going to maybe get from this film?
Good question, man. Honestly, I hope they stick with the whole journey, go through the other side emotionally, and I hope you come out on the other end feeling it's a very human and empathetic film. For everything it goes through, and I hope it hits you in your gut a bit and connects with you emotionally, feels human, empathetic, and makes you think about some things, and hopefully it makes you think about your loved ones, and who knows,
Perfect. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. So there we go. It never tires to say that we actually had Trey Edward Shults on the podcast. That was a real treat. So Dallas, when did you first get the chance to see Waves, and what was your experience with it?
I first got to see Waves the end of middle of January, I think. Sadly, I missed the opportunity to catch it at the London Film Festival due to scheduling issues, i.e. I was on holiday when it screened at the end of the festival, and it had already screened for the press by the time I got down for the festival, so I had a long wait, and I know you in particular were quite annoyed about this because you were desperate to talk about the film with someone, and no one else had actually seen it yet, so I saw it at the Cineworld down the beach, which in Aberdeen there's two Cineworlds, and the one at the beach is always the one that they put stuff that they don't think is going to have maybe as much commercial clout as other films. So I took a half day to actually go and see this one because I think it's about 2 hours 15, about that. It's quite a long film, so took a half day, went down, watched it, and it was an interesting one, very interesting watch. I knew something happened. I didn't know what was going to happen, and when it happened, it certainly changes your opinion on the film and the way you look at it. And then I have to say, the tonal change did not work for me on first time out. However, I did rewatch it a couple of weeks ago, and I have to say that my opinion improved on the film slightly. I think with Krisha, I think I was around about 3 stars. It Comes at Night for me was a 5-star one. This initially was a 3-star film, but it has bumped up to a 4-star film for me. So yeah, I know that you were very keen on it first time round, but what in terms of rewatches, where do your opinion now sit on the film?
Yeah, so before I could probably dive into my opinion, what we'll do, sort of like the film, we're going to split this into sort of a 2-part discussion, because I think with a film like this, we will sort of dance around it, and the joy of it being the second movie is that we can sort of have a chat about the first half of the film, a bit of a spoiler-free kind of chat about some of the points, and then what we'll do is we'll have a little spoiler warning, and then join us again as we sort of dive into the second half, and you'll be rewarded with interviews with the leading actors from the film. So there's an incentive to go off and watch this film and then come back and check in with us in the second half of the film, because I think we do need to sort of talk about this kind of this twist in the second half of the film. So
we need to talk about Kelvin.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, the film really held up for me on a repeat viewing. When I went to sort of see it in London at the film festival, I kind of went into it where I was looking forward to it. I liked Krisha. I wasn't a big fan of It Comes at Night. And the trailer sort of for Waves was like, that looks interesting enough. It seems like a mood piece. I couldn't quite get a feel for, anything outside of a sort of family drama that was going to be, which I felt was going to be kind of, that's what I would expect from a Trey Edward Shults film, and I think he'll do it well. And then I went into that film and I was stressed out of my nut for most of that film. And then there's that twist, and I think for a lot of people, especially on the first go, and it took a little while for me to sort of settle into it as well, because I think there's a whiplash effect. You have this almost, just under 90 minutes of cranking up the tension. It's becoming more uncomfortable. It's a tough watch. And then the film almost climaxes, and you're kind of like, oh, right. Oh, I think everyone else sort of expect, like there was talk years ago that Waves was going to be a musical. And, that twist at the heart of the movie in sort of this 2-part version of the film completely caught me by surprise, and I really like that, but it just takes a little bit of time in the cinema to adjust to it, and you sort of need to go with it, or you sort of use that time to recover, and then by the time you've recovered, that second half is sometimes almost over. So I think that there's a lot of people can have complaints, critiques of sort of the second half of the movie. It might not be their favourite part, but I think it works really well, especially on a repeat view, and I think how this film kind of plays off these two halves and how they make a whole in the end.
Yeah, no, I think it's when I sort of watched it and reviewed it and sort of gave it a 3, it was purely down to my own personal opinion of just the sheer sort of difference between the sort of first and second half of the movie. It was nothing against any of the acting or the story or the way it was told. It was just, it's like the wind was knocked out of me, and then, like you say, it takes so long to kind of almost adjust to almost this new style of storytelling and filmmaking that comes in the second half. That it was the second viewing that everything sort of started to really sort of come together for me, and I could appreciate it a lot more. And yeah, so it was that. But obviously, we keep talking about the second half, so we can leave that to that point. But I think, like you say, that there was this building of tension and stuff. And one thing I noticed about the first time I watched the film in the first half is it is very almost sort of discombobulating in the fact that I noticed that and I sort of timed it on the second viewing because it was one of those sort of, because we were offered the chance to get to do a deep dive and whatever. It's around about sort of 5.5 minutes, the first opening of the film. The camera does not actually stop moving. It's almost constantly revolving or rotating around the shot. You've got the scene where the main kid is in the car with his girlfriend. They're driving around, and sort of the car it's spinning around in the car, or he's training with his wrestling cast, and it's sort of moving around the sort of gym and stuff like that. It's not until about sort of 5-6 minutes that it almost sort of pauses to take a breath, and I think that energy of the film sort of carries you forward for the first half, and that's what sort of really drives it and pushes it. And then the second half of the film is much more sort of static in terms of cinematography. There's lots of long static shots and sort of two shots between people and stuff like that. So it's a much sort of calmer, slower pace in the second half, which I think is, again, sort of builds into the almost sort of dichotomy of the two. You've got it's sort of like in the first half, if we're going with a wave analogy, the waves are crashing relentlessly against the rocks, whereas the second half, it's more like tide is going out and it's sort of gently lapping at your feet, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, and I think for people that might not have seen it, sort of the context of that first half is sort of Kelvin Harrison Jr. sort of returning. He was also in It Comes at Night, sort of plays Tyler, and he's got this really tough father played by sort of Sterling K. Brown, who's really pushing him in sort of his competitiveness in terms of this like high school wrestling, and he has a relationship with Alexis, played by Alexa Demi, who is becoming a bit of an A24 regular. Obviously, we saw her in mid-90s, and then we'll see her in sort of Euphoria. And everything begins to sort of go wrong. He picks up an injury. He's told under no circumstances should he be wrestling or putting any pressure on it. He continues to wrestle. He continues to work out on it. And his girlfriend becomes pregnant. And in one of the most sort of tough scenes, sort of like they have it that they're going to go off and like get an abortion, and like they turn up to this like clinic, and there's this person outside that is racially abusing sort of Tyler, adding to his stress, and then she decides like she cannot go through it after like there's this person protesting, and it just completely all falls apart, this kind of relationship, and it sort of sends it on to sort of a pretty deadly kind of situation. And it's just like, as you say, it just continues to go and go. And I'd recently just been in the midst of a sort of Paul Thomas Anderson sort of filmography sort of rewatch, or watching his shorts, and I sort of watched this just after I'd watched Magnolia, and I sort of can see some of the same sort of themes, and very much that early Paul Thomas Anderson, the first half of his career, that non-stop moving of cameras, following people. The camera is never static, and it immediately grips you in. I think the cinematography is so good as well. Like you've got an A24 film when they really lean into the neon. And then we have this fantastic score from Atticus Ross and Fitch. So again, another fantastic kind of score, and it just all kind of builds up. So I don't know about you, but every time like Tyler was sort of working out with his arm, I was just like, on repeat view, and even though I knew where everything was going, knowing what was going to happen and sort of his behavior still stressed me. And I think that's sort of a testament to the kind of the performance and sort of the way Trey Edward Shults has written and directed it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, if you think about what he goes through with sort of the injury, the girlfriend, the breakup, the pregnancy, abortion, drug addiction, he gets addicted to painkillers and stuff like that. That's like almost like an entire series worth of like the OC character troubles condensed down into like 90 minutes or something like that. It's like he really sort of goes through the ringer. I do have to question the Doctor in all this, that apparently left it up to him to tell the folks. He's technically still a minor, so I think anything that serious, I think your parents would probably be informed or something like that. So the fact he keeps it, you can understand why he keeps it from him, because his father is so tough on it, on him. Superb sort of performance by Sterling K. Brown, and part of, we'll get into the second half, but part of my reason for initially disliking the second half had something to do with his characters, but we'll get onto that. We're talking about the first half. And one of the other great things that I noticed about this film, either that you can tell it's an A24 film, well, actually you can kind of tell it's an A24 film, but the characters have clearly never seen an A24 film due to the number of characters who keep driving around with their heads sticking out of a window. I mean, I think there's about 3 characters do this, and every time I'm doing it, because there was this plot twist that comes up, but not, is it a plot twist? No, it's just a plot development, but it turns out it's not really a twist. It's not like, it's a shock and it's a surprise, but it's not like a going against everything you've seen. The way the film plays out is completely natural. But it's like, yeah, they've clearly never seen that, because I was half expecting I've got A24 done it again, someone drives into a pole or something and basically they get decapitated in that. Because when you hear sort of that thing, your mind sort of automatically tries to generate your own ideas of what the film's going to do. But one of the other sort of things, as a projectionist, I think I've talked about with other films. We're talking about the Lighthouse on the previous episode, and how the storytelling was informed with a decision to sort of shoot in sort of 119, stuff like that. It wasn't until about halfway through the film that I thought, hang on, they've changed the aspect ratio on this. I'm pretty sure it started out as flat, and then I'm pretty sure it was scope, and then at one point it sort of goes 1 through 3, and I'm like, okay, what's going on here? And basically, essentially the camera is decreasing the area of the characters. It starts at flat, and then slowly, so you get the black bars coming in at the top and the bottom, and then they come in from the sides as well. And essentially, this is increasing the pressure on Kelvin Harrison's character. He's basically, it's like the same how, a coal, if you put enough pressure on it, it becomes a diamond. It's kind of, the pressure is increasing to the point where he turns into a diamond, or basically he bursts, and unfortunately it might go the other way. And I've sort of, this was the other thing that I was doing with my notepad and pen. Well, I say notepad and pen, I'm lying. It was notes on an iPhone. But basically, at the doctor's, when he first gets the diagnosis that he's got an injury, the aspect ratio starts to shrink. And then at the wrestling match, when he gets his injury, it shrinks again. The abortion clinic shrinks again. When he attends the party, it shrinks again. Then it goes up to full screen, and then at the pivotal moment, it then goes 1 through 3. And then I'll talk about the aspect ratios of the second half in the second half spoiler chat. Because I think you didn't actually notice on first viewing, did you? That you see, you were clearly so taken in by the story and stuff that you just didn't notice. I just, from my projectionist eye, I started to notice these things, and I was like, it then sort of bugged me because I thought they were playing it in the wrong ratio, but then it turned out they weren't.
No. It was one of those things, very much sort of the repeat viewing for me. Like I became sort of like aware of some things going on, but I was sort of just so gripped by sort of the drama. I mean, I'd had it kind of written down here, sort of. So I've done my research. So obviously it starts at, I'm going to butcher this, but 185 to 1. Then it narrows down to 240 to 1. Then it turns to 137 to 1. After that, the aspect ratios go in reverse, going back to 240 to 1, and then finally back to 185 to 1. Would that be correct? Am I getting a B? Yes, I'll take that. So it was really interesting on that repeat viewing to watch that and sort of look at the the creative choices that Trey Edward Shults makes with that, and I think that we'll use that as our moment to sort of dive into the second half. And so here's your spoiler warning. Go away, watch Waves. You can find it, rent it on most places, and stick with us for some sort of reviews. We'll have a guest on to talk about the film, and we'll have interviews with the cast, so hopefully we'll hear from you shortly. But we're going to dive on now. So Tyler, goes to this party. He's been ditched, obviously, by his girlfriend Alexis. The tension is built, and he hits her, and she falls to the ground, and she is dead. And Tyler goes to jail for life. An incredibly shocking moment that would be the climax of most films is very much the turning point in this film, when the story sort of turns then on his sister, played by Tyler Russell. So the focus of the second half of the film is very much Emily, and then her love interest, played by Lucas Hedges, returning A24 alumni, as Luke. So, as we sort of said, this is very much a sort of whiplash effect, this sort of and suffering tension, anger, hate, racism, so much challenges, to something where it's about dealing with that hurt and sort of something a bit more softer and tender, and learning to have that forgiveness of yourself and the forgiveness of your loved ones. How you kind of touched on sort of the repeat viewing sort of worked a bit better for you. Did the sort of second half work that bit better for you, sort of knowing what to expect?
Yes, I think I was much more accepting of where the story was going to go, because I think if you'd come to this film and you get to the turning point, you can imagine that the second half of the film, you think, well, there's still about a good hour to go, whatever, will be taken from Tyler's experiences of going through the trial or going to jail and dealing with what he's going through, having to live with the fact that he's accidentally killed his girlfriend. But it doesn't. It then focuses on the sister, who, it's fair to say, was a very minor character in the first half of the film. She's probably in maybe sort of 2 to 3 scenes at the most. She does it. Those scenes are with her brother, but because also given these very strong and sort of almost damaging relationship he has with his father, one might have expected the second half to maybe have been from Sterling K. Brown's perspective, in looking at his grief and the fact that essentially, is he at fault? Was he responsible for? Did he push his son too far in the training and stuff like that? And is it his fault that this accident happened? So when it didn't go that way, that's where I was like at odds with the film, because it's like, well, that's not how I would have done the story. But then I didn't write in direct waves, so who am I really to have an opinion on that? So the fact it goes with the sister character, it did take me a while to get going into that, but it certainly was much easier to go along with that story on the second half. I mean, how did you find it?
Yeah, I went with it quite well the first time. I thought Emily, Taylor Russell put in a really good performance, and as I say, it did take some adjustment, because I think that's the joy of a film like this. It kind of pulls the rug from underneath you, and so many of these films, even some of the good A24 films, they go roughly where you expect in terms of like the emotional journey. This sort of plays with aspect ratios, expectations. I think this is it's a very brave decision to have something so different in terms of the mood for the second half, in terms of the look, the focus as well. It asks a lot of the audience, which you shouldn't have to say, but that's the case with a lot of these things. And I just thought it was a really interesting sort of little mini movie in itself, and I think it all kind of ties together really well when you sort of get that lovely scene with sort of Trey Edward Shults' character and his daughter, where they're just talking about like their brother, their son, sort of how they both failed him, and she's talking about how she had the opportunity to potentially stop him, but tragedy just like this can sometimes happen. Things go out with our control, and the amount of hate and and self-loathing people must have for something like that must just be kind of remarkable. And you really see sort of the damage that this character has kind of gone through, and it's again a drawback to Magnolia. It's that healing process of learning to forgive ourselves, that we may have done wrong, or we may have kind of facilitated something kind of going tragically wrong, but can we forgive ourselves and take it from there? I thought that was something so profound.
Yeah, no, it's about that sort of internal forgiveness, and also, Tyler has ruin his life. But there's certainly, at several points in the second half of the story, the potential for Tylerson to destroy the entire family, who are all individually and collectively struggling to come to terms with what's happened, and do they all have a future together moving forward. And it's really interesting that the way that sort of Trey does this is by introducing sort of Lucas Hedges' character, who was very briefly sort of seen in the first half, but he sort of develops this relationship with Taylor Russell's character, and the way that she learns to deal with her own issues is the way that Lucas Hedges deals with his issues with his own father, who he said, sort of beat him and stuff like that as a kid, but then sort of left and abandoned them, and then he sort of finds out that his dad's got cancer, and then they decide jointly to make the decision to go up and see him, and then they sort of manage to reconcile their differences. And when she sees how they are together and the positive cathartic experience that they have, she sort of knows that basically, maybe things are going to be okay. And, her family are obviously worried about her. They're texting and phoning her, trying to get a hold of her, and she's not replying. But, at the end, she hints that everything is going to potentially, well, for the three of them, be okay. But it does hint that they may be able to have some sort of relationship with Tyler as well, which is, well, that's what I seem to take from it anyway.
Yeah, that was very much what I took as well. I think, like, it's, that guy, he is in sort of his jail, he's eating his sausage and mash, really, and it's, he will kind of need that love and forgiveness as well, despite the fact that he's probably committed one of the most heinous acts possible. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things that I think a lot of people can watch that and take, have that debates and discussion about kind of forgiveness, and how do you deal with a family member that does something like that? Can you overcome it? It's going to be interesting. Let's also hear from sort of another person's now perspective on that. So let's hear from critic Kelechi Ehenulo sort of about her thoughts on sort of Waves. So welcome back to the podcast, Kelechi. Before we dive into the discussion on Waves, I just want to say congratulations on your charity fundraising that you've been doing recently. Do you want to tell people a little bit about it, and is it still possible for people to donate?
So yeah, it was partly part of Junk Online. They were fundraising on behalf of Black Lives Matter and the Trussell Fund. So a couple of the staff members had been able to do movie marathons in getting donations into the for the charity. So it's going for an important cause. And I'm more so proud of the team just to raise that kind of awareness, and especially in a difficult time.
We'll be sure to put a wee little link to that in the show notes. I know that came out of nowhere, but I thought, I just remembered you had such a successful kind of charity drive, so we'll certainly give it a little shout out. But obviously we mentioned there we're going to be talking about Waves, but taking a step or two back in someone's filmography before Waves, how familiar were you with sort of Trey Edward Shults' previous films, Krisha and It Comes at Night, before going in to see Waves?
Well, Krisha I have not seen, unfortunately. Just to kind of slightly go a little bit back. Waves was my first film I watched of his work, so I had a bit of a backwards way to discover his work. But I did watch It Comes at Night recently, purely because it's been on my watch list for a while. So personally, I thought it was a good film. It's somewhat incomplete. I think it ends a little bit far too quickly for my liking to give an overall sense of the film. But atmospherically, I enjoyed the tension and the build-up, traits that has clearly evolved into Waves, and if you see that pattern. And even though it did frustrate me in places a little, I did enjoy the mystery and the ambiguity of it all. Easily could have been a film about the bigger picture and the viral outbreak, but in the end it became this isolated, paranoia-filled character study, which I enjoyed much.
I think you're the only one right now that is desperate for some sort of pandemic virus outbreak film, Kelechi.
Yeah.
I do not want to see that at all. I am living through it. That's more than enough for me.
It's too close to home in some respects. So I was kind of, when I watched it for the first time recently, I was thought, you know what, this is a little bit too there's too much for me right now. But I stuck with it and then got through into the end, and maybe hopefully we don't end up in those post-apocalyptic scenarios that they found themselves in.
I can't believe we've got to say that with a straight face. We're not even being ironic. It's like, fingers crossed we don't end up in the worst case scenario. So obviously you mentioned Waves was your first Trey Edward Shults kind of film. What were your expectations going in? Had you seen sort of the trailers? Were you excited for it? Or was it just going to be another film to catch on another day?
Well, I didn't have much expectation. Like I said previously when I came on your podcast before, and I talked about The Last Black Man in San Francisco, I heard about the film online through, online reaction from the US. And, thankfully it got added to London Film Festival last year. I had only seen the trailer. So when it came to its actual debut at London Film Festival, I just went in completely blind.
So your first time seeing it, what was your kind of initial reaction? We are in the spoiler section of this podcast, I should add, so you can go as wild with spoilers and let things twist and turn as much as you want.
Okay. So my first initial reaction was I was overwhelmed. I think to give a little bit of clarity to the audience, it's probably the most unique film I've ever seen. I went through, I would say, an immersion. It's an audio, visual, sensory, I would call it like an experimentation. And I knew fundamentally that I loved the film, but also found it difficult to articulate because of the experience that happened, because there was just so much to process. Not just the film itself, but aspects of the storyline that hit me emotionally. And the more I thought about it, the more it grew on me. And I mean, I always know I have gaps in my film knowledge and so forth. And there's always, a lot to learn and engage from. But for me, watching that film in the cinema, where it was just taking advantage of all of, the technical assets, your surround sound speakers, the big screen. Like I said before, it was probably the most unique experiences I've ever had watching a film. Certainly, it's different from, say, like when the audience reaction watching something like Avengers Endgame, where you're in the cheer mode when the portal scene or something like that. This was something that I think just took me by surprise, especially as I went in there blind.
You've obviously sort of just rewatched the film. Has your opinion sort of changed from that first watch? And obviously I only just recently rewatched it this week myself. It's crazy to think we're sort of nearly a year since we kind of caught it at London Film Festival. How have things sort of changed in sort of that 9 months? Or, has your opinion sort of changed in any way with that film? Or is it easier to watch knowing how it will all come together?
That's a very good question. For me personally, it hasn't changed. But I think, because of the time lapse that, from the time we saw it at London Film Festival, you sort of, for me, I kind of slightly forgot about the emotional, but I always know it's still an emotional film. But, you end up sort of compartmentalizing it in a source. But watching it again recently, you get to pick up a lot of those nuances that I had missed before. And strangely enough, and this is a very unconventional hot take, by the way, but it does feel a bit like a musical, or even better, a music video, as if, Trey Edward Shults went through his Spotify playlist and decided to structure a film around those mood pieces. And when you have, soundtrack, gods in Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross doing the soundtrack, I could not tell you where that soundtrack began and ended. That was, on a technical aspect, that is still so effective. And I loved that it dialed up those experimentation, especially with the shifting aspect ratios, which became much more clearer to me than when I was completely immersed when the first time I saw it, especially in the first half of the film, where it was slowly increasing the intensity.
Yeah, you speak about the intensity of it all. what did you make of that 2-act structure to the film, really? Sort of the first half of the movie, it's focused on Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s character of Tyler. Then we have the twist in the middle of the movie where, you know, he's convicted of murder. And then the second half of the film is with Taylor Russell's Emily, who we sort of see the consequences of Tyler's kind of reaction and how that affects his sister and her life kind of going forward. How did you sort of feel about that kind of the first time, and what did you make of that structure?
You know what? I remember it being a bit contentious point, you know, contentious point when I saw it at a London Film Festival, because I remember a lot of critics didn't see the point, because it builds into this wave and this cycle of intensity, and it comes to this climax where Tyler commits murder, and I think for a lot of critics, that was the end point of the film. They didn't see the point of the second half of the film, because I think for them it felt almost like you're watching another movie in a sense. But here's where I stand by it, and I still stand by this. I think as consumers of popular media and culture, you know, I think we're very used to simplicity. You know, police catch the bad guy, and that's the end of the story, and the film cuts to black. You know, but we never seem to go beyond what happens after, because at the end of the day, no matter what the situation is, there's still a family or, you know, people getting caught up in the drama, and regardless, it's hurtful. It's you know, we don't see that perspective. I think the best way to kind of put that into context is think about something that's happened recently. You know, if I think about George Floyd, for example, or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery, you know, these are 3 deaths that played out very publicly to the entire world. But in my mind, I can't even begin to imagine what those families are going through behind closed doors in dealing with the absence and the trauma and all the emotions that comes along with it. And if I wanted to go a little bit deeper and something personal towards me, I think I could think about the death of my mother, who passed away 4 years ago. A person who was such an influence on my life, and you know, for people who know me, I wouldn't be the person who I am, you know, without her. And her death created this void, which I had to emotionally deal with. And that's why the second half of that film resonated with me, because it is that look into that aftermath in comparison to a very intense and, by, you know, Tyler standards, very hyper masculine and alpha male dominated. And the second half is really about picking up those emotional pieces picking up those emotional pieces and rebuilding yourself again. And I'm not gonna lie, I've shed tears throughout that second half of that film, and I still do, especially on a recent watch, because I saw aspects of Taylor Russell's Emily in myself with that grieving process. And that is important because you get to see the full range and spectrum of Black characters that becomes much more than just trauma. You know, the Black experience is much more than the criminalization or a life of servitude or background characters fulfilling a specific purpose. You know, I bring up a recent example of like something like Michaela Coel's I May Destroy You, and if you haven't seen that, I fully recommend it, because I like to think that Waves taps into that same synergy at changing the perspective in depicting those nuances, an aspect which you wouldn't have gotten if the film ended where I think everyone expected it to. And for me, it lives up to the poetry of the title. As in, you know, Waves is a tsunami, but it also can be calm, and it can be calm and gentle, and it can be tumultuous and everything.
What did you make of this family that we've touched on here? Sort of Kelvin Harrison Jr. as the son, Taylor Russell as the daughter, Sterling K. Brown as this domineering father figure, and we've got Renée Elsie Goldsberry sort of as this stepmother, calming kind of influence. What did you make of this, the casting, and almost a focus on, you know, we tend to see it with sort of, you know, in A24 films and sort of quite wider, that when we sort of focus on black characters in indie cinema, it can often be people that are working class. This very much is a film about a family that is a very, upper class kind of American kind of family, a slight difference kind of to what we're kind of used to in sort of kind of mainstream cinema and indie cinema almost, I was thinking myself.
Yeah, absolutely. From a cast perspective, I absolutely loved them all. I think they worked really, really well together in showing those dynamics of family life. The chemistry felt so definitive that you felt that they were actually a real life family, and that's a testament to each individual actor doing some incredible work. It's not just the ideal of perfection from an outsider view of a successful black family, but it's all the microscopic conversations and reactions that are laid in between. And speaking about the affluency of the black community, especially in the way it's depicted in Waves, again, that is important, as which you've touched upon. The beauty of the story is that it can happen to anyone. The issue is universal, and there's a freedom to explore those nuances. And it already changes the conversation of how we see black families, especially a family that is affluent, which immediately goes against the grain of stereotypes and how we look at black people in popular media. But the most important aspect also to grab out of that is it's just also black people just simply living. There are times of normalcy and there's moments where they are torn apart, which again goes back to what I said about showing the full range and spectrum of emotions, because we are absolutely capable of that. But even saying that, what I appreciate about Waves is how it still finds spaces to put black perspectives and how the world sees them. I think about, for example, Sterling Kane Brown's Ronald, for example, and how he talks to his son. Now, the exchange is very alpha male and territorial because of that dominance, but he's talking to his son about how he needs to work 10 times harder because black people are not afforded that luxury of being average. And that immediately brought back memories of my mum giving me that same pep talk when I was a kid. And I'm sure that would be the same experience for many other black families, because we are passing down knowledge of our own experiences in the hope that we don't face the same battles, and allowing kids to experience opportunities that they had never had before. So that for me immediately resonated. And I see that reflected in, my nephews and my nieces who are, fast growing up, probably a little bit too fast, but it's true, because there are two worlds that we live in. And for the side of black people, inequality is just inescapable. And what I love about how Waves depicts that from an upper class black family is how it handles those dynamics. Yet the first half is very competitive and trying to be the best, but you have Tyler being in this fearful shadow of his father with these high expectations that he may not even live up to, and that's all without defining who he is as a person. For someone who literally does have the world at his feet, he's very popular in school, he's on the team of the wrestling team, he has a good girlfriend, and it just seems to collapse apart as soon as those problems come into fruition. And that's in comparison to, I would say for the second half of the film, where it's more or less the female gaze on how, the women are finding themselves again and their voices, which for me starts to become, the soul of the film, if that makes sense. And I think it also reinforces how parenting is just always a challenge. And again, that's universal. And that's regardless of whether you have kids or not, because what I love is how it builds empathy for those characters and those challenges, where you understand those perspectives. It's not something done out of cruelty. It's about wishing for the best for your kids and providing a framework to achieve those goals. And those goals, especially in this particular situation, is goals that are refined and perfected. And it will always come down to a question of balance and how much you push them. And in the case for Tyler, it was too much, and he was becoming increasingly reckless. He was doing drugs, drinking excessively, and creating more injury to his arm, in the hope that he was living up to the expectations of his dad. For Emily, especially in the first half, we don't necessarily hear her voice. She's pretty much isolated, where her voice is just not given the same weight as Tyler's contributions. So in that case, it becomes, parenting with good intentions, but with the wrong outcome. So again, going back to the film being split, it's very much a rise, fall, and rise again type of experience, but seen through a child's perspective and navigating those hurdles in front of them.
We're very positive on the film. What were some of the highlights of the film for you, and what makes it such a special film?
I think it's because of those little kind of conversations that it has. I mean, first of all, it's the acting. I'm in full praise of Taylor Russell and Kelvin Harrison Jr. I'm excited to see where their careers take off, and it looks like they're in both, in some exciting projects upcoming, and it will be fully deserved because they carry this film to their full emotional weight that they're capable of, and it really shows. One of the things I really appreciate is also Sterling K. Brown's performance. And if you watch, again, this comes from being a second watch of the film, you will notice that he uses his eyes, and he does a lot with his eyes, and you can tell exactly what he's thinking in those moments. And again, that adds to the tension, especially, or as it goes later on, it's about accepting the culpability of those actions. And, with Renée, for example, I watched Hamilton for the first time a couple of weeks ago. So Waves is just another signature performance in her career. And I personally wish there was more of her in the film. But with the material given, she really pushes the depth of what this film was about. But again, going back to the kind of conversations that it has, one of the things that, again, struck me was, its brief commentary on social media and how it's used, especially with Tyler and Emily as they go through these changes. Tyler, for example, I would say is, obsessed, and that becomes his downward spiral on his mentality, versus Emily, who ends up deleting hers after seeing the toxicity aimed at her brother. I don't know whether that was in the director's intentions, but I certainly got a vibe where it became that subtle commentary on our relationship with those apps and media, and looking at the extremes of how it can affect someone's mental health. And another thing that I loved, it goes back to how it's constructed. It's the technical aspects. It's the way the camera would spin 360 degrees in the car, or way the camera would spin around certain characters, especially in the first half. It reminded me a lot of Barry Jenkins and Moonlight, and he utilized the same technique to convey male behavior. And I love the whole dreamlike qualities that the film now takes again.
What perhaps didn't work for you in this film, on either your first watch or your rewatch, or kind of over the two?
I don't know necessarily whether it worked or not. I think it's probably a little bit of a unjust, but it's something that I constantly wrestle with, and that's I don't know if you agree with this with me, Lee, but it's the Lucas Hedges character of Luke. Because I remember the first time I saw it, because it comes at a point where it's in the aftermath of Tyler killing his girlfriend. And it's obviously something incredibly traumatic, and the film builds into this incredible, sequence of images that leads up to it. But here he comes into the film, and he's a guy who's very awkward, and you laugh at that awkwardness. Yeah. And I just remember the first time I saw it, and I wasn't really sure how to feel about it, because it's like, should I be laughing at this moment? I don't know. and it felt I felt very uncomfortable in some respects. Not to at Lucas Hedges, because he's a brilliant actor, but just like, I don't know whether I should be laughing at this moment, because it is obviously a very serious film. And I think audiences will be split on that as well. Like I said, I don't necessarily think it's something that didn't work, but I think it's something that eventually grows on you. So the second time I watched it, I didn't mind it. I guess in the terms of Emily, it helps with her grieving process.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of welcomed it a little bit, because that first half of the film, I suppose it's a feature film really in itself in terms of the running length, is so suffocating and stressful. Even on that rewatch, I was watching it, it adds in an extra tension when you just know where it's going to go. And you sort of go into the second half, and there's that almost element of whiplash. You go from that intensity to something a bit more kind of calm. And then sort of Lucas Hedges come along, and you're just like, he's kind of funny, he's a bit aloof. And it's just like that. I don't know if I'm laughing with him or I'm just kind of happy for just like, a little bit of the valve to just be turned a little bit, just to kind of go, oh, I can kind of settle into here. I like to think it's a bit on purpose and stuff, how he's kind of written and acts and so on. And I think there's probably that element that his presence just kind of brings that little bit of a smile to Emily as well. So I for one welcomed it, but I can certainly see your point.
Yeah, and just to carry on, I think also it's, as I said before, with the Black experience, it's much more than just trauma. So the fact that he's able to bring some joy into Emily's life as she's rebuilding herself as a character, again adds into like, we can have fun, we can have those dreamlike moments of, first love, going away, and enjoying life, and the way, and it's reciprocal. She's able to help him come to terms with his dad that is passing away. I think he's dying of cancer. I think it was in one scene. So that becomes, them almost healing each other through pain. So I think that was necessary for that to happen.
We spoke a lot about many of the themes and messages of the film. What's your big takeaway from the film after you've watched it not once but twice now, about the themes of the film and one of the strong kind of messages almost of forgiveness?
Well, I'm not a philosopher, so but I think it's a lot like life. There's no rule book to it, and I think everyone's just making up things as they go along and just seeing what works, if that makes sense. But in learning from your mistakes and taking the time to reflect, I think it's all part of the process. The emotions will never leave you, but you're always finding healthy ways to manage it. If I take my personal example of grief, the film doesn't necessarily have the perfect resolution, I guess if you're comparing it to cinematic kind of terminology, but I think it's way it ends gives it a sense of an open ending, like the open start to something that's going to happen, as in a healing. And I think that's necessary, because it's very easy to blame yourself for things that are simply out of your control. And I think the film is just very honest in accepting that, hence why it shifts the way it does. And I think that just demonstrates the power of good storytelling.
And what's your kind of final thoughts on the film in terms of, kind of rewatching it, how it's your experience with it? And I suppose one of the big themes really for me since I saw it last year was I thought performances in this film, the score, the cinematography, the editing, I had strong hopes that this film was going to be represented at the Oscars. I think that was perhaps maybe a bit naive of me. It's had a very limited run at UK cinemas earlier this year. That's probably more of a run than a lot of places have had. But what do you kind of feel about the film and its legacy almost a year on?
I mean, well, as like you, I was disappointed that it was never picked up for Academy Awards, at least be nominated, because I think it was definitely, for me, one of the best films I saw last year, and definitely one of the best films I saw at London Film Festival. And as you mentioned, the editing, the cinematography, it's absolutely lush. So I think if anybody who has not seen this film, I would say it's a very beautiful, profound film that I hope that leaves a mark on you in some capacity. And I hope that audiences are patient with it in the same way I was, and open-minded as the same as I was, because what you're about to see is something that I don't think many people has seen in terms of that kind of experimentation. And it will, for me, I highly recommend it. It's probably one of the best films I've ever seen.
Well, thank you very much for joining us once again, Kelechi, as we sort of wrap up this project. If people wanted to hear more about your thoughts on film, cinema, culture, where's the best kind of places to follow you and kind of read your work?
So you guys can find me at Kelechi Ehenulo on Twitter, and if you want to follow my blog, which is called Confessions from a Geek Mind, it is at Geek Mind UK, which you can follow on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
Well, thank you very much, Kelechi. It's been a pleasure to have you on, not once but twice. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be back again, and can't wait to do some more.
So thanks to Kelechi for joining us once again. It's always really interesting to hear her perspective on things. So the one question I want to pose to you, Dallas, obviously you mentioned sort of your love for It Comes at Night. Is this Trey Edward Shults' best film, or is it still going to be It Comes at Night for you?
It's still It Comes at Night for me, I think. I think for me it was just an exceptional film on first viewing, and on, even though my opinion has improved upon a second viewing, I think for me it would sit now It Comes at Night, then Waves, then Krisha. It will take something special. I know I think kind of certainly in the A24 group on Facebook that we're in as well, I certainly am in the minority that rates It Comes at Night very, very highly, but in terms of lockdown films, it's probably pretty accurate as well.
Yeah, I think it would have to be Waves, then Krisha, then It Comes at Night for me. But I just think this is... I think this film was really done a disservice. I get it that sort of A24 only has so much kind of that they can focus on things. I think Uncut Gems was really the big pushing point for them, in terms of awards last year, and obviously that came up short. But I thought Waves deserved so much more attention at the cinema, from critics, from audience members, and I really hope this is a film that kind of finds an audience, because it's got a hell of a cast, and I think it works still really well at home in terms of an experience. And I would love to have seen this film get the attention. I thought Kelvin Harrison Jr. certainly deserved some sort of award for this. It seems like Loose seemed to get a bit more attention for Kelvin Harrison Jr., which I thought was a little bit odd. But I thought Waves, excellent film, and I think a lot of people are going to sit there when they eventually catch and going, how did we sleep on this film? And I really hope this isn't the last film we see from A24 and Trey Edward Shults. They've had a really good batting average so far, so can't wait to see what they do next.
Oh, I think he's probably got like a lifetime deal or something with them. I think, they're probably not like the highest grossing of, the A24 films. There are bigger hitters out there, but I think the fact that he's the only person who's worked with him sort of 3 times now. I mean, Robert Eggers and like Gary Aster and like the Safdies and stuff will probably sort of work with him again. But I think, the fact that he's basically from his first film sort of onwards, they sort of developed this relationship. I think he's sort of set for life with A24. I know what you say, like in the UK, I think it sort of came at that awkward time where I think it was Universal that were releasing it over here as well, and they had The Lighthouse, and the other A24 film coming out like 2 weeks later, and I think it just kind of got lost in the shuffle sort of around awards time. I think it was released the same week as 1917 and stuff like that. So I think it was always going to struggle, because again, with a film like this, is how do you market it in terms of how much do you give away, in terms of like tone and what happens and stuff like that. It's a difficult one to judge. I know sort of like when the first sort of trailer from A24 came out, I mean, on paper and sort of just looking at the story, it did look like this was the most sort of straightforward A24 film that looked like it could get Oscar buzz in terms of performances, and the storyline looked like it was that kind of thing that would appeal to voters and stuff. But I guess, the strength of like Adam Sandler's performance and stuff, and like the weirdness of The Lighthouse meant that it just got lost in the shuffle in the end, which was a shame. But I think something like Lockdown is, with people turning to streaming and stuff like that in order to get their sort of film fix, I think there is the opportunity to find a new audience, because I think it is now, I know a few people, sort of film writers, have been writing about it recently, so I think it must be getting like a Blu-ray sort of DVD release as well. So hopefully that will mean that other people sort of find out about the film and can witness the third film in A24's Lucas Hedges' awkward sex trilogy between mid-90s and Lady Bird as well, which all have sort of cringeworthy sex scenes. Two of them feature Lucas Hedges, but the other one features Alexei Demi.
And one of them features Alexa Demi, yeah.
It's all circular.
Well, I before we wrap up, I mean, you make a great point there. Obviously, you hear in the interview with Trey Edward Shults is like, how do you market a film like this that it's sort of turned, you know, the twist at the heart of the film that makes the structure? How do you advertise it, promote it, discuss it? I mean, me and Trey Edward Shults, we sort of danced around the film and sort of like aspects of it, and then obviously you will hear in the interview next with Sterling K. Brown, Renée Goldsberry, Kelvin Harrison Jr. and Taylor Russell, that no such kind of filter was there in terms of spoilers. So to play us out, you know, I can't think of anyone better than these four people talking about Waves to wrap this episode. So we'll be back in 2 weeks for our penultimate A24 project, Movie Double as it stands, with In Fabric and Uncut Gems. So this is how we win, but this is how you win, by getting to listen to these four fantastic actors talk about working on Waves. We'll see you soon. Bye. Kelvin, this is your second time with Trey. When did you sort of get involved in this project? When did you first sort of hear about this exciting role?
Almost a year before we started shooting. Trey had mentioned it, like at the end of It Comes at Night. He was like, I'm going to do my version of a high school movie. And I was like, cool, put me in. And he was like, maybe. So, and then like, you know, I guess almost a year after that, he started writing it, and he was telling me like the idea of what, you know, the two parts of the story, which part do you want to play? And he told me about the wrestler and a boyfriend character. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I want the harder role, the athletic role, because as you know, I'm not athletic. So
I don't like to hear that. He's very athletic.
Oh, trust me.
Very.
We played pool the other day, and
it's not an athlete. That's pool. Pool is not billiards.
That's like saying darts is like a sport.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
It's a finger workout.
You're good.
I know nothing about sports, as you can see. I just call pool a sport. Anyway, but yeah, so he did that, and then we started collaborating and texting and talking to each other for about a year about the script, and then suddenly we were in Florida.
When I see the film the next time, I'm going to have a hard image of Lucas Hedges now being replaced with you. Imagine that whole time.
I'm trying to think about that too. Weird.
So obviously,
we might not be here.
Yeah, definitely not.
So you picked that second kind of the role, the lead. What was it like? Because Tyler is such a challenging character. He makes so many decisions that you're watching, you're thinking like, you know, oh, why is he doing that? What's kind of gone down that way? Is it difficult to sort of take on a role like that where you know the audience is going to be struggling to maybe match up with what you're doing? You know, for example, you get this advice, you shouldn't be continuing with the sport. You continue to do it on, and we feel those punches extra harder. What's it like sort of taking that on and knowing the audience might be, you know, resistant to what's going on?
That was part of the challenge that I loved about the role, was like talking to Trey and finding this through line between our upbringings and the pressures we received from our father, and just really finding the layers of what this young man was. He loved his dad, and he had looked up to his dad. He's an icon. He loved his mother, and you know, he loved his girlfriend. That was his best friend. So it was finding all those different colors and trying to show us humanity and make sure that you remind yourself that he's just a 17-year-old kid who's looking for an escape and looking to find himself. And that's all. Yeah.
Trey touched on that you sort of worked on the character together, developed it. What sort of things do you look at and you think that was a bit that I was able to contribute towards the development of this character?
Small little things. I mean, mostly like the black stuff. You know, it was just the conversation. He was like, "What would it sound like?" You know, because he wrote that monologue Sterling has, and the version of it that his dad would have said. And I was like, "But you know, maybe his dad would be like that big head of yours." So some, you know, small little details that kind of make it sound familiar to our experiences and just our relationships with my sister and. The pressures, the race aspect of high school, or like things that are being said to us, those small little details just kind of just not elevated, but kind of made it more specific to our experiences.
as kind of touched on there, that Emily, your character, becomes the lead in the second half of the film. What was it like for you? In the first half of the film, we sort of see you in the background, kind of building up. What was it like for you to then take the lead in the second half of the film? You're very much the emotional kind of heart of the film.
Well, it really worked the way that the story was told, I think, purely as a character, just because of what she's going through and kind of being like the child that isn't paid attention to as much and is maybe like the lost child in some ways, or that archetype at least, and being in the background of the first half kind of sets you up for that. And at least as a character, I felt that like I'm not really connected to the family as much, even though there's this whole off-screen life that does exist in which we all are together and have these family moments like that. It's not like I'm in the background all the time, but I think what's really smart is that feeling is set up for the second half. So it feels like it felt really good to be able to not really be present and then kind of come in and have this whole journey on my own. I mean, the journey with Tyler is so much about like his parents too, and mine, you see so much more freedom from them that they give me. Like even the text that you send to me, Kath is worried, you're not at the beach house, where are you? It's just a text. It's not like pick up the phone, the phone, where are you? You know, so yeah, I like the contrast of the freedom versus the control. What was it like shooting with Lucas Hedges? I'm now trying to imagine it isn't you. What was it like sort of like shooting with Lucas Hedges? Because it's such that first half of the film is so intense. I think I went grey overnight watching that. When that second half, you get that sort of like, you can breathe again a little bit, and there's so much humour between the two of you. What was that relationship like to work on together? He is so funny together with you. I know, he's so silly. It was really great. He's so unique, you know. He's like, the way he approaches scenes is so different from anybody else I've worked with, and he kind of tries to find like the weirdest way into it, which is really, it's good to work with actors like that because it kind of forces you to think in a different way, and he's just so funny. He's like the goofiest person. I don't think people really know that because he's always like so sad in his films, but he's really not. He's like such a silly boy. Yeah, he's fun to work with.
And then for yourself, what was it like to sort of create this parental kind of role, and how do you sort of, as like a family, create something that looks so authentic on screen?
Sterling, for me, I felt what you felt when you walked in the room, which is an immediate chemistry with these people. I mean, I think as soon as I got the role, and I think I might have been the last of the four of us, I think I had just accepted with my agent, and all of a sudden I had texts from them on my phone. And I think that would probably match Catherine's journey into a family that existed. But just such a welcome immediately, like they were waiting for this person to be cast so they could finish this, so they could know what they were and who they were. It was like they were like sitting there like, is she going to do this? Who's going to do it? And I just felt like an immediate like, okay, I guess I haven't met them. I know who they are, but now I'm family. And I felt that way when I met them. And I think that really parallels what she must have felt in terms of the need that this group of people had for a mother. And her probably need to do that, to play that role. And it's interesting because it seems like she had a choice. It was a choice. Do I want to be the mother in this family? She had that moment. And what I love about the film is it seems that she has to make that choice again by the end. And she chooses to make it. I was like thinking at that last scene when she goes and visits you in the jail cell. It's like, and then, that happens even before, right? I think it's before she takes your hand in the room. So it's like, so I think you see this character, you learn in the movie that she had to make a choice, and then you see her make it again, which I think is the beauty of the film and what family is and forgiveness.
Yeah. That's good. What was your question?
Well, I suppose a fresh one for you two. What was it like creating that father-son relationship? Because that is incredibly intense. Even sort of the workouts, the conversations that are had. How did you sort of develop that relationship together?
It started when we had a conversation. We met in Los Angeles and sat down for lunch with each other. And he was training for his wrestling, is eating like 3,000 calories, getting bulked up, swole. And I didn't know if this was something that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I could watch a movie where a young black man takes a woman's life. And then, as beautiful as I thought the second half of the movie was, I was like, can I follow it? Can I follow it through to the end? Or am I sort of stuck in this place? And, Kelvin and I talked about it. I was like, dude, this is really an intense thing. Yeah. And I get artistically the intrigue of the challenge. But like once we put it out into the world, it's sort of like not yours anymore. Yeah. And like there could be, some very differing responses to it, right? And I think ultimately the fear that I had, I thought was the fear that Ronald would have for Tyler in the film. And that maybe that was a reason to do it instead of not doing it, right? And Kelvin is such a, I mean this in the best way, but he's such a sweet man, and gives his all to it. And I could see that from just our meeting. And then when we got on set, and this is to a person, but like, I think I'm a very inquisitive person, so I ask a lot of questions because I find like that questions allow us to get to know each other when people are open to answering them. And like, I try to be the change that I want to see in the world. So if anybody asks me something, I'm just like, blah, blah, blah. And then people will kind of like, blah, 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 with me. And so that's kind of what happened with us. And like every time I came back to Florida, because I was going back and forth between California and Florida shooting, like it was always just like, what's up, dude? What's going on? And we would have these moments of just like checking in, and he'd be like, oh man, this is crazy, but this is good. Yeah. And like, I don't know if I'm doing good. I'm like, you doing great. And he's like, I don't know, man. I don't know what to do. But like, there was a sense of mutual respect and like a joy to be in each other's presence, because I'm not the dude who feels like I have to replicate exactly what happens on screen in real life. Like, I think that would have been a little bit too different strokes for different folks. Yeah. That's not necessarily the way that I work. I need you to know that I'm available and open to play, right? And I think once we create that sort of environment, then when it's time to focus, you focus and lock into the character. At least that's kind of how I approach it. But I think the writing was so good, and I have my own personal experiences of what it means to be black in America and being told you got to be twice as good to get half as far, and believing it. Yeah. Okay, like
I'm still believing it.
Believing it, right? And so that it wasn't hard to say it to Tyler, because there's a worry and a concern that you have for your children, and you want the best for them. Yeah. And you try to arm them with what you think they need to succeed. And then so the caveat is like, you don't even recognize, like I don't think that Ronald was even cognizant of the fact that he wasn't creating a dialogue with his child, he was just telling him. Yeah. Like he sort of is an individual who's kind of taking the air out of the room. And this is, however he sees it, is how it's gonna go. And then we have a tragedy that we experience, and he's sort of forced into another way of being. And the conversation with his wife, and just recognizing that, like, I firmly believe that we all do the best that we know how to until we know how to do better. You know what I'm saying? And it's really, I don't think I would have taken the job if the scene didn't exist between Emily and Ronald in the second half, because I'm edified in recognizing that this man may have learned a different way of being with his children.
One thing I really took away from the film on a kind of personal level, recently I had a family member, nothing like the film, had a run-in with the law, was facing court and stuff like that. And it was fascinating to watch that, because I could see what was going on with the parents, which was something I could see that happened with my parents, and something had gone on within our family. And it was making me think about, when we see a lot of these movies about people going to court, and we know what it's like in America, with incarceration and the rates and the oppression that goes on there, and that discussion of how can we still love people that do something so terrible, that cause so much damage to the loved ones and to the wider circles. And it feels like this film is having a conversation and getting people to think in a way that you don't often see with crime dramas. But every time it's black and white. With here, it's like we've seen the consequences, and what happens in that first half is usually the end of the film.
Right.
Here's what happens afterwards. How do we continue on? How do we reconcile with that? What was that conversations like for yourselves with that second half of the film, and what this film kind of means in a wider scale, perhaps in America and globally?
You know, it's interesting. I was so focused on how we are going to deal with still, you know, seeing the humanity of a black man after the crime, that I think this is what watching this film was surprising and healing for me. That's really, I think, where Trey comes in and his genius comes in, because I just didn't know how we were going to get past it. And I think that's also maybe just the actress trying to go down the journey, thinking I'm going down a journey that really my character is going down. Like, how are we going to get past this? And so I think what the family goes through is probably kind of a microcosm of like what I think our society goes through when our children are just from being children are find themselves ruined. It's devastating. I mean, it's devastates me now, you know. And how do the other children survive the loss of their brothers and sisters? How do the parents keep going? How do the relationships keep going? And I think he took time to show how his life still matters after, you know. I think I think he was really able to, I mean, and I was, you know, it's just occurring to me, I was so worried about it being a black boy. But now in this moment, because you said that, I feel so kind of grateful because now you actually see a black boy who committed a crime, but you never lose the humanity. And so I'm going to say this because in your answer earlier you were talking about adding kind of the African American stuff, but another thing you really added, which is the most important thing, is the humanity of a person that commits this crime. I mean, that's what you were focused on when you were shooting this, was how do you still recognize me as a human being that deserves love? Like, that was the challenge. He did it. And I think because we've seen audience members stay with him and us and this family and care by their performances, you know what I mean? You can't see that I'm pointing at these actors. You know, I think because we were able to do that, it's so important that this family is black, because we've heard white people in these screenings be able to stay with them and feel and be sad and moved and emotionally connected to what happens to them after and see themselves in us after. And I think that's what we need in America and the world right now.
What with kind of people's reactions to your character, for example? As you say, I watched it and I thought, so that is a most heinous act, but your heart breaks. You think that's a life sentence for someone so young, for something so horrible, for a mistake, but I'm still with this person. What was that like? How have people reached out and reacted to you? Was there a risk of like, I'm taking on a person here that's going to do something horrible? Are people going to conflate the two perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, we were all scared going into it, you know. I mean, literally everyone was scared. But it's been really refreshing and moving, and just to see, like, the other night, we finished the screening and someone came up to me and she was telling me about her son and her relationship with her son, and how his experiences, and he's trying to find his voice through his music, and he's out late and he's doing these things, and she's not really sure how to communicate with him as a parent. And you know, it just seeing her go, well, I'm going to support him, I'm going to love him, and I'm going to just give him the attention he deserves, and hopefully I won't be afraid of what's going to happen. And I think these types of things make me feel like, okay, well, the communication aspect between a parent and a child is growing and it's changing, and people are seeing, I don't know what I'm saying, but you know.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
No, I think just to clarify that point, like I do think, and I hope that this movie furthers this, in that you have as much to learn from your children as they do from you. You know, that there needs to be the space for a dialogue. Like when he comes to Emily, he's like, you know, tell me what's going on in your life, right? Like it was born out of like necessity because he ain't had nobody else to talk to. But like it was like, yo, we like this is a conversation.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's not a one-way street. Like it's a conversation that you have, and there's still lines of demarcation. You're still the parent. You're still the child. But like at the end of the day, like when your voice feels heard and appreciated, then maybe you don't feel like you have to go off and do shit on your own.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That you have to take matters into your own hand in a way that becomes really, really tragic. The other thing I wanted to add to it too, in terms of taking on these roles, is that there's a fear that some actors can fall into about wondering if you will ultimately be liked. And I think to a person, we didn't fall into that trap. I think a teacher of mine once told me, it's like, you're not going to be liked all the time, but what you want is for the audience to understand.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Like, do they understand why you made the choices that you made? And as long as you communicate that clearly, you've done your job, right? And I think, because if you get caught up in, like, if they like me and whatnot, then you play kind of a losing game, because not everybody's going to like you. Like, there's going to be people.
Not everybody is likable.
Not everybody is likable, you know what I'm saying? But if you can understand, that's the biggest goal, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah,
I really appreciate
you.
One of the best films of the year. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you very
Cheers.
much.